Let's move on to another question, this one about hate speech. Now, there's been a lot of debate recently in the House of Commons about the Canadian Human Rights Act stepping on freedom of speech in Canada. And this question was tweeted to us by @jprosa, who asked, what are Linda Duncan's thoughts on Canadian Human Rights Act, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and its use or misuse in our culture?
Well, I'm suspecting the question might have come around the controversy of a bill tabled by one of the Conservative backbenchers. And he had proposed that Section 13 be struck down. And that's the provision making an offense under the Human Rights Code to be making salacious comments about somebody because of their race or because of their sexual orientation, sure, or their origin and so forth.
Now, the contentious issue there, just so people understand, is that it says comments that are likely to cause harm,
right? Which
is not the same as in the criminal code, as which he's not touching, which is comments that would incite violence. So that's the piece, just so people are
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have to remember what the role of the two statutes are. The role of the criminal code is if you're actually causing serious harm to somebody, death, serious harm, or inciting violence and so forth. And there are very significant penalties in that case and a very high burden of proof that
sure,
their actions actually cause violence or death or injury or so forth.
So back to the likely to cause harm.
Back to the Human Rights Act, they're simply based on the principles that Canada has adopted, that we should not discriminate based on sexual orientation, race, origin, sex, and so forth. And I firmly believe that that provision should be there. We've seen instances where there's transmission of a lot of information that, you know, homosexuals are evil and should be struck down and forced into retraining and so on and so forth. There's also situations where people make very salacious comments about Aboriginal peoples. I think that in the Canada I live in, that's reprehensible behavior, and I think most Canadians agree with that. It's one thing just in casual conversation with a friend or family, you're simply voicing your opinion. That's not what the Human Rights Code is about. What it's about is that you actually affect somebody's opportunity for employment or access to housing or even livelihood or, you know, mental state and so forth.
But is there a problem with it? Because, like back to the likely to cause harm, you don't actually have to prove that you caused any harm. And I mean, this is not, you know, like we were talking a little bit before the show about left versus right. This is something that is sort of become a nonpartisan issue because you've got journalists who have maybe written editorials and people have taken offense to them. And so it becomes this thing where you have to go into this quasi-judicial kind of organization. Your court costs aren't paid whether you win or lose. And, you know, a lot of people do feel like it steps a little bit on free speech. Is it worth it, in your opinion?
Well, free speech was never meant to be all-encompassing. There are restrictions in free speech. For example, the Conservative Party itself wants to come down heavy on anybody who transmits information that is pornographic or harmful to children, right? I mean, there are lots of mechanisms whereby we want to fetter free speech. And you have to remember, too, that in the code, the penalty and so forth is based on how severe the action was as a result of what they did. So you're talking about, and there have been suggestions as well. Why throw the baby out with the bathwater? Why completely get rid of the provision? We could instead put in provisions where you could get your costs reimbursed if you were not found to have caused any harm and so forth. And I think that's a more reasonable approach that a number of the members of Parliament have proposed. So generally speaking, it's a mythology that we have complete free speech. There are all kinds of fetters within society where we try to contain what is said. Again, a perfect example is the House of Commons, right? You can't call another member stupid or by some name, right? I mean, we're very polite Canadians. And we're talking about scenarios where there is an ongoing transmission with some kind of intent, which become pretty evident, I think, on the subject matter. Between people just talking, there is no way that one controls that, nor should someone. But if somebody is actually intentionally trying to transmit information to cause harm to a certain group of people, then I think that's reprehensible, and I think the provision should remain.